The sound of distant thunder rumbled across the hills. The sky overhead dark and brooding, heavy with the promise of a storm. The ruins of the old town lay in silent decay, the once thriving market square, now a graveyard of charred stone and shattered wood. Sir Valen stood at the edge of the broken city, his armor scratched and dented from the battles of the past weeks. His eyes scanned the horizon, unblinking, the weight of his mission pressing down on him. "We should have moved faster," Lady Nyra said softly, her voice cutting through the thick silence. She stood beside him, her gaze lingering on the wreckage. "But now we're too late." Valen's jaw tightened. "They will pay, Nyra. Every last one of them, I swear it." She turned to him, her face filled with quiet sorrow. "But will it bring back the ones we've lost?" Valen's eyes darkened, his grip on his sword tightening. "It doesn't matter. We fight not for them but for the future. For those still left to save." She nodded, though doubt lingered in her eyes. "Then let's make sure their deaths mean something." Valen stepped forward, his boots crunching on the gravel. The storm was coming, and with it, their vengeance. They moved through the ruined town in silence, their footsteps echoing in the emptiness. Nyra couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them, but every time she glanced over her shoulder, there was nothing. Valen, however, was focused, his eyes scanning the path ahead. "We're getting closer," he muttered, though there was no certainty in his tone. "I can feel it too," Nyra replied, her hand instinctively moving to her sword. The further they ventured into the broken town, the darker the atmosphere grew. Once proud houses now lay as skeletal remains, their windows shattered, their roofs caved in. The air smelled of smoke and decay, and the distant sound of dripping water echoed from the cracks in the stone. "We need to find shelter before nightfall," Nyra said. "It's not safe here." Valen didn't respond, his gaze fixated on the farthest horizon. "We don't have the luxury of time." The storm finally broke, rain falling in torrents as they took cover beneath a crumbling archway. The wind howled, whipping the rain sideways and forcing them to huddle together for warmth. "This won't last long," Valen said, his voice low as he wiped the water from his brow. "We'll move out as soon as it lets up." Nyra nodded but didn't speak. She knew the importance of keeping their energy up, but the weight of the journey was starting to take its toll. Her muscles ached, and her mind wandered back to the lives they had left behind. "Do you think we'll find them?" she asked quietly, her voice barely audible over the storm. "We have to," Valen replied, his gaze focused on the storm outside. "There's no turning back now." Nyra didn't reply, the unspoken truth hanging in the air between them. Their mission was far from over. The rain eventually tapered off, leaving the world damp and heavy with moisture. The air was thick, the scent of earth and wet stone filling their senses as they resumed their journey. They reached the outskirts of the town just as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the broken landscape. "We'll camp here tonight," Valen said, his voice low and practical. "We need rest before we head into the heart of the valley." Nyra nodded, pulling her cloak tighter around her shoulders. She could feel the weight of exhaustion creeping in, but she didn't show it. "I'll take first watch," she volunteered, though she knew neither of them would sleep easily. Valen nodded and began unpacking their supplies, though his eyes never strayed far from the horizon. "We're getting close, Nyra. Tomorrow we'll make our move." The night passed without incident, but neither of them slept well. The cold air, the quiet shadows, and the constant sense of being watched kept them on edge. By morning, the valley ahead of them seemed even more ominous. "We should move now," Valen said, breaking the silence. "The longer we wait, the more time they have to prepare." Nyra didn't argue. She knew he was right. They packed up quickly, their eyes scanning the distant mountains where the enemy's stronghold lay. "We're almost there," she said, her voice firm despite the doubt in her heart. Valen looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Tomorrow we finish this." With that, they began their journey into the heart of the valley, where their destiny awaited. The valley stretched out before them, the path winding between jagged rocks and twisted trees. Valen and Nyra moved in silence, the weight of their mission pressing down on them. The air was thick with tension, and though the sun had risen, a chill remained in the air, as if the land itself held its breath. "This is it," Valen said, his voice low but filled with determination. "We're close now." Naira nodded, her hand tightening around the hilt of her sword. She had seen too much destruction in her lifetime to be afraid now, but something about this place felt different, as if it was waiting for them. "What if we're walking into a trap?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Valen's expression hardened. "If it is a trap, then we'll walk right into it. We're not backing down now." They reached the foot of the mountains, the stronghold looming above them like a dark shadow. There was no turning back now. "Let's make sure we're ready," Naira said, her voice unwavering. Valen gave her a nod. "We go in prepared, and we leave nothing standing." The stronghold stood before them, its stone walls dark and imposing. The gates, once grand, now looked like the mouth of some ancient beast, waiting to swallow them whole. A sense of foreboding hung in the air as Valen and Naira approached the entrance. "We'll need to be careful," Valen muttered, his voice tense. "This place reeks of death." Naira's eyes scanned the walls, her sword ready. "We don't know what we're walking into, but we don't have the luxury of caution." They moved forward, their steps slow but steady. As they passed beneath the archway, the air grew colder, the atmosphere heavier, as if the fortress was alive with dark energy. "I'll take the left," Valen said, his voice steady. "You take the right, we move on my signal." Naira nodded, her grip on her sword tightening. "Understood." They advanced into the darkness, the shadows swallowing them whole. Inside the fortress, the silence was oppressive, broken only by the soft echo of their footsteps on the stone floors. The halls stretched on endlessly, the torches flickering dimly, casting long shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. "We need to find the central chamber," Valen said, his voice barely a whisper. "That's where they'll be." Naira's eyes narrowed as she scanned the dark corridors. "We're not alone," she said, her voice low. "I can feel it." Valen's hand tightened on his sword. "We keep moving forward. No turning back." They turned a corner, and the air grew colder still, the smell of death and decay filling their nostrils. In the distance, they could hear faint voices, low murmurs echoing through the halls. "They're here," Naira said, her voice filled with dread. "But where are they hiding?" Valen's eyes hardened. "We'll find them, and when we do, they won't escape." The voices grew louder as they moved deeper into the stronghold. Valen and Naira pressed on, their senses heightened as the sound of muffled conversations reached their ears. They rounded another corner, and the sight before them froze them in their tracks. In the center of a large open chamber stood a figure cloaked in darkness. Their face was hidden, but the aura of power radiating from them was undeniable. Around the figure, several others stood in a loose formation, their expressions hidden beneath hoods. "Who are you?" Valen demanded, his voice strong but betraying a hint of caution. The cloaked figure turned slowly, their eyes gleaming with an unnatural light. "Ah, the vengeful knight and his loyal companion. How predictable." Naira stepped forward, her sword at the ready. "Enough with the games, we know what you've done. It ends here." The figure chuckled softly. "You think it ends with you? Oh no, this is just the beginning." The figure's laugh echoed through the chamber, a chilling sound that sent a shiver down Naira's spine. "We've come to stop you," Valen said, his voice unwavering. "Whatever plans you have, they end now." The cloaked figure's smile widened, and they raised a hand. "Do you truly think you can stop what has already begun? You are but pawns in a game far greater than your understanding." Valen's sword gleamed in the dim light as he stepped forward. "I'm no pawn, and I'll stop you no matter the cost." The figure's eyes flickered with amusement. "Very well," they said, their voice dripping with malice. "Then let us see if you have the strength to back up your words." Suddenly, the ground beneath their feet trembled, and the chamber was filled with an unnatural energy. Naira's grip tightened on her sword. What is happening? Valen's eyes narrowed. They've prepared for us, but we're not backing down now. The figure's laugh echoed once more as the chamber began to shift, the floor beneath their feet cracking open. The true battle had only just begun. The chamber shook as the ground cracked beneath their feet. Valen and Naira barely managed to keep their footing as the dark energy swirled around them, the very walls of the fortress trembling. The cloaked figures stood at the center, their hands raised high, channeling the power that seemed to flow from the earth itself. "We won't let you win!" Valen shouted, his voice filled with defiance. The figure's smile only widened, a sinister glow in their eyes. "You are far too late. This world was always doomed. I merely helped it along." Naira's sword gleamed as she stepped forward, her eyes burning with fury. "You think we'll just stand by and let you destroy everything? I think you'll try," the figure replied, their voice calm and cold. "But in the end, it's futile." With a sudden movement, the ground split open even further, sending a wave of dark energy crashing toward them. Valen raised his sword just in time to block it, the impact sending him stumbling back. "Get ready," he said, his voice gritted. "This is only the beginning." Valen grunted as the dark energy slammed into his sword, forcing him to his knees. The power was overwhelming, but he refused to give in. Beside him, Naira was doing everything she could to hold her ground, her sword glowing with a faint light as she cut through the dark magic. "We need to break their concentration," Naira said between heavy breaths, her eyes locked on the figure. Valen nodded, his eyes never leaving their opponent. "We'll need to move fast. If we can disrupt their focus, we have a chance." Together, they surged forward, Valen's sword slashing through the energy while Naira took a different approach, darting to the side to strike at the cloaked figure. The figure turned, sensing their approach, and with a flick of their hand, sent a wave of dark force crashing toward them. But Naira was quicker. She ducked under the blast and leaped forward, aiming her sword directly at the figure's chest. The cloaked figure laughed, a cruel and hollow sound that echoed through the chamber. As Naira's sword struck, it seemed to pass through the figure's form, like they were nothing but smoke and shadow. "You think you can stop me?" the figure taunted, their voice a whisper on the wind. "You are nothing compared to the power I control." Valen and Naira recoiled as the figure's form shifted, the shadows around them darkening even further. "What are you?" Valen demanded, his voice steady despite the overwhelming presence of darkness. The figure's smile deepened. "I am the harbinger of the end, the one who brings the world to its knees." With a sudden snap of their fingers, the shadows in the room intensified, forming into twisted nightmarish creatures that lunged toward the pair. Valen and Naira fought back, their swords clashing with the monstrous figures that emerged from the darkness. "We have to end this now," Naira said, her voice fierce as she struck down one of the creatures. The creatures melted into the shadows as quickly as they had come, but the air remained thick with the malevolent energy of the cloaked figure. Valen and Naira, exhausted from the battle, stood back to back, their swords still raised and ready. "Is this all you've got?" Valen spat, his voice full of defiance. The figure tilted their head, the darkness around them pulsing with an ominous energy. "You think this is my full power? I have only begun to scratch the surface." With that, the figure raised their hands once more, and the chamber trembled. The walls seemed to shift, warping under the pressure of the figure's magic. "We can't let them do this," Naira said, her voice tight with fear. "Valen, we need to finish this, now." Valen's eyes flashed with determination. "I've been waiting for this moment." He surged forward, using all his strength to push through the energy that threatened to overwhelm him. Naira followed close behind, her sword glowing with a faint ethereal light as they both attacked in unison. Valen's sword connected with the figure's dark energy, and a powerful shockwave rippled through the room. For a moment, everything was silent. The figures staggered back, their face twisted in anger. "You will regret this," the figure hissed, their eyes burning with fury. "I regret nothing," Valen replied coldly. "This ends now." With one final decisive blow, Valen swung his sword, cutting through the dark magic surrounding the figure. The figure screamed in frustration, but it was too late. The shadows around them began to dissipate, and the figure's form flickered before vanishing entirely. The chamber fell silent once more, the oppressive energy lifting from the room. Valen and Nira stood in the aftermath, their bodies bruised and bloodied, but victorious. Nira looked at him, her expression filled with quiet relief. "It's over. For now," Valen said, his gaze hardening. But this was only one battle. The war is far from over. The silence in the aftermath of the battle was deafening. Valen and Nira stood alone in the now empty chamber, their breaths heavy from the fight. The oppressive darkness that had once filled the room had lifted, but the air still felt thick, as if the fortress itself was mourning the loss of its power. "We did it," Nira said, her voice soft but filled with the relief of a hard-won victory. "But at what cost?" Valen glanced around, his eyes scanning the room that had just held their adversary. "Every victory demands a price," he replied grimly. "But we paid it willingly." "We don't even know what we've truly faced," Nira murmured, her eyes dark with suspicion. "That figure. There's something more to this than just a dark sorcerer." Valen clenched his fists, the weight of the battle still lingering. "I'm not leaving until I know the truth. There are answers here, and we'll find them." They moved to the center of the chamber, where a strange object lay glowing faintly in the center, surrounded by the remnants of the battle. The mystery was far from over. Valen knelt before the object, his eyes narrowing as he examined its surface. It was an orb, dark but shimmering with an inner light, pulsating with a strange energy. His hand hovered over it, feeling the magnetic pull as if the orb was alive. "Do you think it's safe?" Nira asked, standing a few steps back, her eyes wary. "I don't know," Valen admitted, his voice tense. "But it's the key to understanding all of this. We can't leave without knowing what it is." Slowly, Valen reached out and touched the orb. The moment his fingers made contact, the chamber shook violently. A deep, guttural sound echoed through the walls, and the orb began to glow brighter, its light intensifying until it enveloped the entire room. "Valen!" Nira shouted, rushing forward to grab him, but it was too late. The light swallowed him whole. The world around Valen shattered. The chamber, the fortress, and even the air itself seemed to splinter as the orb's light engulfed him. His vision blurred, then cleared, and suddenly he was standing in a completely different place. The landscape was vast and desolate, an endless wasteland beneath a blood-red sky. "What is this place?" Valen whispered, his voice barely carrying over the howling wind. "Ah!" Before him, a figure emerged from the shadows, an ancient being, draped in tattered robes that fluttered despite the lack of wind. Their eyes glowed with the same eerie light as the orb. "You have crossed into the domain of forgotten souls," the figure intoned, their voice like 1,000 whispers. "And now you must face the truth of your past." Valen's heart skipped a beat. "The past, what do you know of it?" The figure smiled, though there was no warmth in it. "More than you could ever understand." The figure's smile faded as they raised a hand, pointing toward Valen. "You have come here seeking answers, but the truth is not something you are prepared to hear." Valen squared his shoulders, refusing to show fear. "Tell me what I need to know." The figure stepped forward, the air around them rippling with unseen power. "You were chosen not by chance but by design. Your bloodline is tied to the forces that you now fight against." "What does that mean?" Valen's voice was tight, the weight of the words hitting him like a physical blow. "The destruction of your world is part of a cycle. Your family has always been part of it, and now you are the last." Valen's mind raced. "What do I need to do to stop it?" The figure's gaze softened for a brief moment. "To stop it, you must sacrifice everything, and in doing so, you will bring an end to your bloodline." Valen stumbled backward, the weight of the figure's words sinking in. The idea of his bloodline being tied to this endless cycle of destruction, he couldn't accept it. He had to find another way. "Is there no hope?" he asked, his voice filled with desperation. The figure's face remained impassive. "Hope? Hope is a fleeting thing," a lie we tell ourselves when we fear the truth. Your choices are limited, and the outcome is already decided. No, Valen said firmly, shaking his head. I will not accept this. I refuse to be a pawn in someone else's game. The figure's lips curled into a cold smile. Then you are truly foolish. But it doesn't matter. The wheel turns, and you will play your part, whether you accept it or not. Before Valen could respond, the ground beneath him began to shake once more, and the world around him began to crumble. The light from the orb flashed, and he was pulled back into the darkness. Valen gasped as he was pulled from the vision, the chamber around him once again solidifying into view. The orb had lost its glow, now only a dull, lifeless object lying before him. The echoes of the figure's voice still reverberated in his mind. He staggered to his feet, his legs weak from the overwhelming vision. Nira rushed to his side, her eyes filled with concern. Valen? What happened? Are you all right? He took a deep breath, his hand still trembling as it hovered over the orb. I saw the truth, Nira. What truth? She asked, her voice tight. The truth about my bloodline. This cycle of destruction, it's been happening for centuries, and we're caught in the middle of it. He paused, trying to steady himself. I'm the last of a line meant to end it all, but to stop it I'll have to give everything. My life, my family. Everything I've known. Nira stared at him, her expression unreadable. Then we make sure you don't face it alone. The weight of the vision hung over Valen as they moved through the fortress, his mind filled with the horrifying revelation of his past. But he pushed the thoughts aside. There was still work to be done. We can't stop now, he said, his voice grim but resolute. We have to find the others. There are more of them, more like the figure we faced. Nindrajta. Nira nodded, her eyes sharp and focused. I know. We need to get to the central chamber. If there's anything else that can stop this, it's there. They navigated the winding corridors, moving with purpose. Every step felt like an eternity, and every shadow seemed to conceal something waiting for them. Their breaths were shallow, their weapons at the ready. Do you think we can stop it? Nira asked, her voice soft but filled with determination. Valen paused, his eyes darkened by doubt. I don't know, but I will try. The path led them deeper into the fortress, and the oppressive darkness seemed to grow thicker with every step. Suddenly, the ground beneath their feet began to tremble, and the walls shook with an unnatural force. Stay alert, Valen said, his voice steady, though his grip tightened on his sword. Nira glanced around, her senses on high alert. Something's coming. Without warning, the ceiling above them cracked, sending debris crashing to the floor. A loud, monstrous growl echoed through the halls as massive, shadowy figures emerged from the darkness. More of these things, Nira said, drawing her sword. Valen's expression darkened. They were waiting for us. The creatures advanced, their eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. Fight, Valen ordered, his sword raised in preparation. We pushed through. The creatures charged, their massive forms moving faster than expected. Valen and Nira fought with precision, their swords cutting through the dark beasts as they advanced. Valen's blade flashed in the dim light, his movements fluid, almost instinctual. Nira's strikes were swift and deadly, her focus razor-sharp. We can't keep this up forever, Nira shouted, her breath heavy from the exertion. There's too many of them. Valen gritted his teeth, his eyes scanning the battlefield. Then we end it. With a swift motion, Valen summoned the last of his strength and struck at the heart of the nearest creature. The blow was clean, and the creature fell, dissolving into dark smoke. Keep going, Valen yelled, motioning for Nira to follow him. We've almost cleared a path. The last of the creatures dissolved into smoke, leaving only the remnants of the battle behind. Valen and Nira stood in the midst of the destruction, their faces worn but filled with determination. The fortress was eerily silent now, but the sense of dread had only grown. We've cleared the way, Nira said, her voice breathless but resolute. Now what? We reach the central chamber, Valen replied, his gaze fixed on the distance. We end this. As they continued down the winding halls, The sound of their footsteps was the only thing that filled the oppressive silence. They reached a massive door at the end of the hall, adorned with intricate carvings and symbols. "This is it," Valen said, placing his hand on the door. "Everything we've fought for. It's all behind this door." He turned to Naira, his expression determined. "Are you ready?" Naira nodded, her sword raised. "Always." Valen's hand tightened around the door handle, the weight of everything they had fought for pressing on him. He turned the handle, the door creaking open with an eerie groan. The air that spilled out was cold, almost suffocating, carrying a faint but unmistakable scent of decay. "This is it," Naira whispered, her voice steady despite the tension that hung between them. Inside, the central chamber was massive, the ceiling lost in shadows above them. The walls were covered in faded murals, twisted, disturbing depictions of battles fought long ago, heroes and monsters locked in eternal combat. But at the center of the room stood a figure, bathed in pale, flickering light, their back to them. Valen stepped forward, his voice ringing through the chamber. "It's over. This madness ends here." The figure turned slowly, their face obscured by a dark hood. "You think you can stop what's already been set in motion?" Nira's grip on her sword tightened. "We'll stop it no matter the cost." The figure finally spoke, their voice soft yet full of authority. "You don't understand the power that you're trying to destroy. This world was never meant to survive. Its end was foretold. You and your bloodline were always part of this." Valen's eyes narrowed. "You think you can manipulate me with lies? This is my fight now, and it ends with you." The figure laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the chamber. "You are so sure of your victory. But the truth is, you've been following the strings that I've set in place for centuries. Your resistance was always part of the plan." Nira stepped forward, her voice unwavering. "Your plan won't work. We're here to stop you." The figure's smile faded, replaced by a cold, calculating gaze. "Then come, show me your strength." With a sudden movement, the figure raised their hands, and the room trembled. The murals on the walls seemed to come to life, the painted warriors and beasts shifting and moving as if they were stepping off the walls and into reality. The air crackled with dark energy. "We won't let you control us any longer," Valen shouted, charging toward the figure. But the figure merely raised a hand, and the ground beneath Valen cracked, sending him stumbling backward. Naira lunged, her sword aimed at the figure, but she too was stopped mid-motion, a wave of dark power pushing her back. The figure's voice filled the chamber. "You cannot fight destiny. This world is mine to shape." Valen pushed himself to his feet, his expression resolute. "Not if we have anything to say about it." Valen, struggling against the weight of the figure's power, felt a surge of energy within him. He drew on everything, the loss, the battles, the unyielding desire for justice, and with a roar, he broke free from the dark grip holding him. Nira too found her footing, her sword blazing with a brilliant light. She stepped forward, her gaze never leaving the figure. "You're not the only one with power," Valen said, his voice now full of authority. "We will fight until the very end." The figure narrowed their eyes. "You are fools. Do you think your strength can match mine?" Valen and Nira moved in unison, their attacks synchronized, their weapons cutting through the darkness. The figure's power surged, but it was clear that their control over the chamber was waning. "This ends now," Naira said firmly, striking with a decisive blow. The figure staggered back, their cloak torn and their face exposed for the first time. Beneath the hood was not a man or woman, but a being of pure, swirling darkness, a manifestation of power, a force that had existed long before the world itself. "You cannot defeat me," the figure hissed, their voice a chorus of whispers. "I am eternal. I am the end of all things." Valen and Nira stood firm, their resolve unshaken. "Not today," Valen said, his sword raised high. With one final mighty strike, Valen plunged his sword into the figure's chest. The darkness writhed, and the figure screamed in fury, their form beginning to disintegrate into nothingness. The chamber shook one last time, and then all was still. The figure was gone, and the dark energy that had once filled the room had vanished. "We did it," Naira said, her voice filled with a mixture of relief and exhaustion. Valen nodded, his eyes hard. "It's over. For now." The chamber was silent, save for the faint crackling of the remaining torches. Valen and Naira stood amidst the ruins of the battle, their faces still shadowed by the weight of everything they had endured. The oppressive energy that had once filled the room was gone, but a deep sense of loss lingered. The figure, the source of the darkness that had gripped their world, was no more. But in its place, there was only the uneasy quiet of an uncertain future. "We've done it," Naira said, her voice low, still processing what had just transpired. Valen stood tall, though every muscle in his body ached from the intensity of the battle. "Yes," he said, but his tone carried an undertone of weariness. "But at what cost?" "There's still much left to do," Naira replied, her eyes meeting his. "What now?" Valen looked toward the horizon, the fortress now beginning to crumble in the distance. "Now we rebuild. We fight for what we've lost, and we make sure this never happens again." Outside, the storm had passed. The clouds were clearing, revealing a sky that was both eerie and beautiful in its emptiness. Valen and Naira made their way through the crumbling remains of the fortress, the walls now nothing more than shattered stone. The path ahead was unclear, but one thing was certain: the battle for survival was far from over. "We've got to make sure no one else falls victim to the same fate," Valen said, his voice steady but burdened by the weight of responsibility. Naira nodded, her face set in determination. "And we will. But first we need to make sure this place stays buried. It cannot be used again." They walked toward the fortress gates, the wind now calm, but the tension still palpable. The true cost of their victory was unknown, but the fight for the future had just begun. "We'll need allies," Valen said. "And we'll need time." "We'll have both," Naira replied. "And we'll take back what was stolen." As Valen and Naira continued their journey, the weight of the decisions they had made hung heavily on them. Their path led them through once thriving lands now scarred by the aftermath of war. The world had changed in ways they could never have imagined, but there was no turning back. "We've seen the worst of it," Naira said, her voice low as she scanned the horizon. "But the fight is never truly over, is it?" "No," Valen replied, his gaze firm. "As long as there's darkness in this world, we'll fight. We fight for the ones we've lost. We fight for those who can't fight for themselves." They came across a small village, its inhabitants wary but hopeful. The people had begun to rebuild, but the scars of the past remained. Naira's eyes softened as she watched the children play, unaware of the horrors that had come before. "It's worth it," Naira whispered. The fight was worth it. As night fell, Valen and Naira set up camp near the village. The stars above seemed to shine brighter than ever, a rare sight after the storm. Despite the chaos they had endured, there was a calmness in the air, a promise of a future they could shape with their own hands. "We've come so far," Naira said, her voice filled with quiet wonder. "I never thought we'd make it this far." Valen sat down beside her, his expression softening. "Neither did I, but here we are." They sat in silence for a moment, the crackling fire between them a welcome warmth against the cool night air. But even as they allowed themselves a brief moment of peace, Valen knew that their journey wasn't over. They had won a battle, but the war was still raging. "We have a long road ahead of us," he said finally. "But we'll face it together." Naira nodded, her eyes fixed on the fire. Together. The next morning, Valen and Naira set out once again, their path leading them through unfamiliar terrain. The journey ahead was uncertain, but the resolve in their hearts was unshakable. "We still don't know who or what we're up against," Naira said, glancing at Valen. "But we're ready for whatever comes next." "We have to be," Valen replied, his eyes scanning the road ahead. "This isn't just about us anymore. It's about every person who's been affected by the darkness." As they walked, the world seemed to stretch out before them, vast and full of possibility. But even with that hope, there was still the lingering knowledge that the shadows had not been vanquished. The final battle was still to come. "We'll stop it," Naira said firmly. "We'll finish this, for everyone."